Another one in Ireland as well, relate to this, and I love talking about this, is the Republican movement in Ireland. You see, Marxism is part of the culture in Ireland like people wouldn't believe. It's part of the furniture, and it's because Ireland was always going to go that way and have a serious problem with this indoctrination. Why? Because we are under the control of the British Empire and the English Crown going back into history, and that creates the oppressed mentality, and that's fertile ground for Marxism to grow. So it's no coincidence that the Republican movement in Ireland is riddled with Marxist thinking. These people will literally have you worried about the British oppression, and talk about imperialism of the past and all this shit, over what the threat that's in front of their faces today. They're completely detached from reality. So, of course, we're talking about lots and lots of people. They're not all the same. In my opinion, the vast majority of people I've ever met with so-called Republican tendencies in their minds also have some sort of Marxist brainwashing. And these people are actually become anti-patriots, like Marxists do, because they start to talk about things that are not constructive or not needed to talk about. Like I mentioned the thing talking about the British. Another one is insisting that we need a united Ireland, and this should be the top of our shopping list right now. This is going to be a recurring theme in tonight's video. People talking and asking for things that they can't have right now, and they accuse anyone else of not wanting that as being part of the problem. That's bad prioritization. I talked about that at the start, and people have accused me of not being a patriot because I don't prioritize united Ireland. United Ireland is a nice idea, and if people in the north were okay with it, and I was sure it wasn't going to cause problems, and I was running the show in Ireland, then I'd wave my magic wand and make it happen. I mean, for God's sake, it wouldn't make much of a difference anyway, would it really? It would just be a token, a gesture thing to make some people feel good. But then again, it would make some people feel good and make other people feel uncomfortable. So it's a big, huge subject, but I'm just pointing it out to bring it back to where I was in the list. I mentioned Marxists, I mentioned Republicans, and there's a lot of contamination between the two. The Republican movement in Ireland arguably didn't start out like that in the past, but it became quickly contaminated with Marxism going right back in history. So watch out for that one. People within that group, Republican movement, can also be quite lefty on other kinds of issues. For example, Sinn Féin have been outed now as Marxists pretty much, and they will be pro-Palestine, for example, which is a Marxist cause. We'll come back to that later, but they give you plenty of clues as to what they are, and they will call a lot of people in the Republic anti-patriots because we don't agree with them. That's the second problem group, is Republicans, right? So, by the way, a lot of them call themselves nationalists, and this is where it might confuse people. The quickest way to go for this is like this. Marxism itself is a form of imperialism. It loves to talk about American imperialism or capitalistic imperialism or European colonial imperialism, but Marxism itself is a kind of imperialism, and it likes to make itself seem as the savior, but it's kind of like the sneaky little snake that's going to replace the type of imperialism that already exists, and it has a very virtue signaling nature which convinces you that it's good and it's here to save things. And Marxism did contaminate many of the so-called nationalist movements in the 20th century, not just in Ireland, but in Africa, South America. A lot of that so-called nationalist and liberation movements was really just Marxism in nature. So it wasn't about freeing countries for them to be free. It was freeing countries for them to join the international Marxist movement, which is just another type of imperialism. So that's all it is. So there's a lot of people in Ireland call themselves nationalists who don't really know what that means. They're not really using it in the pure sense of a word. And while we're on the definitions here, nationalism and what that means, it's the globalism, being opposed to globalism, right? So globalism is the idea of creating a socialistic federation of the world, member states of the world, right? But nationalism is the antithesis to that. It's the idea of having a sovereign country separate from the internationalist system. So we decide what happens in our own countries. We protect our culture. We protect our people. We don't play these globalist games, and we decide what sort of diplomatic or economic relationships we have with other countries and so on. That's what I mean by nationalism. So a person who's brainwashed with Marxism, who thinks they're a nationalist, is contradicting themselves. They're walking contradiction. As there's lots of them in Ireland. They call themselves nationalists, but they're brainwashed with Marxism. Marxism is anti-patriotism. It destroys countries. That's what it does. It encourages countries to go along and be member states of the global picture.